I need to be upfront with you about something. Not because it changes what happened, not because it softens any of what I'm about to say, but because if I don't say it first, someone else will, and they'll use it to dismiss everything that follows. What I watched at Browns practice this week shouldn't have been extraordinary. Quarterback rotations happen every single day across 32 NFL facilities. Coaches give reps, players compete, the depth chart shifts in microscopic ways that usually mean nothing. I know that, you know that, and yet I haven't been able to stop thinking about what I saw, because sometimes the ordinary mechanics of a football practice carry an extraordinary amount of information if you know exactly where to look. So let me tell you where to look. Shedeur Sanders ran with the first-team offense for every competitive 11-on-11 period at Browns practice. Not most of them, not the early ones before fatigue set in and coaches started mixing things up. Every single one, from the first live period to the final 2-minute drill at the end of the session. The starting offense belonged entirely to him, from the opening whistle to the closing rep. And I know what your brain just did. I know the reflex. It's practice reps, relax, it doesn't mean anything. I've heard that same dismissal applied to this story more times this week than I can count, and I understand why it exists, because most of the time it's right. Most of the time, rep distribution in a June practice is genuinely procedural, but that instinct, that automatic deflection, is costing people the actual story happening right in front of them. Here's what you need to understand about how NFL coaching staffs actually think about first-team reps. There is no such thing as a throwaway period when your starters are on the field. None. Every competitive snap with the first unit is a deliberate organizational decision carrying real weight. Political weight, evaluative weight, directional weight. When a coaching staff sends a quarterback out there with the starting offense in a live competitive setting, everyone present absorbs the message. The veteran offensive linemen know. The defensive starters getting reps on the other side know. The scouts, the front office people who quietly drift down to the practice field and try to look like they're just stretching their legs. Everyone on that field speaks the language of rep distribution fluently. It is a quiet language, a precise one, and on this particular day, it was speaking as loudly as I've heard it speak all off-season. But the reps alone weren't even the most important thing. What Shedeur did with those reps, that's where this story actually lives. Late in practice, the Browns ran a 2-minute drill. I want you to actually understand what that environment feels like from the inside, because it matters for what happened next. A 2-minute drill isn't just an accelerated version of a normal offensive period. It's a fundamentally different psychological arena. The clock is real. The urgency is manufactured into every snap. The defense knows the menu gets compressed, knows the offense is working off a shorter route tree, knows exactly which windows are going to open and when, and they bring everything they have to take those windows away. Edge rushers are unlocking full speed. The secondary is locked in. Every single person on the offensive side of the ball knows there is nowhere to hide, no comfort, no rhythm to lean on. You either process fast and execute clean, or you get exposed. That is the specific crucible Shedeur Sanders was operating inside. And in that moment, he took a drop, diagnosed the coverage in real time, and released a deep ball down the sideline to Isaiah Bond, placed on the outside shoulder, the only place it could possibly go, before Bond had even fully broken out of his route. Before, the ball was already in the air, based on a pre-snap read that got confirmed mid-drop and then executed with a conviction so complete it looked almost effortless. That is anticipatory throwing at its highest expression. That is a quarterback trusting his own eyes, trusting his own processing, trusting his receiver to be exactly where the route demands him to be, and then committing to that trust before the route even confirms it. You cannot manufacture that. You cannot coach it into someone who doesn't have it. What Shedeur threw in that moment was not a fortunate completion. It was a declaration. Then Todd Monken walked to the podium. I've spent enough time watching how NFL coaches use language in front of a media scrum to understand the difference between a coach who is speaking and a coach who is communicating. Most post-game and post-practice press conferences are exercises in controlled information management. Coaches say the same approved things in slightly different orders, and everybody goes home with roughly the same nothing. What Monken did at that podium was different. He said, measured, unhurried, looking directly at the room, that the Browns have 2 starting caliber quarterbacks, 2 legitimate NFL starters. I need you to actually sit with that framing for a moment, because that sentence did not accidentally happen. Coaches do not slip into precision like that. They do not wander into assessments that specific without meaning to. When Monken chose those exact words, he was surgically dismantling 2 full weeks of front-runner narrative. The Watson is ahead coverage. The Watson has the inside track story. The quiet but persistent drumbeat of Cleveland media, building a hierarchy out of fragments from a single open practice. In one sentence, Monken walked to that podium and neutralized the whole architecture, because you simply cannot sustain a Watson is leading storyline when the head coach is standing there telling the entire assembled press that both quarterbacks are operating at a genuine starting level. That particular narrative ran directly into a wall, and Munkin is the one who built the wall. Now I want to talk about the coverage of this competition, because what's been happening in the Cleveland media over the past several weeks is a story inside the story, and it deserves to be examined honestly. The local media gets access to one open practice per week. One session out of 3 the coaching staff runs. They show up, they observe for a couple of hours, they file their analysis, and those takes become the dominant public understanding of where the quarterback competition stands until the next open session either confirms or dismantles them. 2 weeks ago, Watson had a strong day on a camera-present day. The story became, Watson is leading. Watson has the inside track. Watson is the front runner. That framing spread through Cleveland sports media with real velocity. It settled into the fan base like received wisdom, like something that had been confirmed rather than glimpsed. And then this week, Shedeur ran with the first team for the entire session and threw the cleanest individual ball of the day. And now the same voices are hedging, reassessing, quietly walking back things they stated with genuine confidence not 7 days earlier. But here is what I keep coming back to. Neither story is actually accurate. The Watson leading narrative was never the full picture. The Shedeur surging narrative isn't the full picture either. The full picture is happening 3 days a week inside a building the media never enters. They see 1 day out of 3. They are working with 33% of the available information and constructing 100% of the public narrative from it. And that would be fine. That would be an understandable limitation if people were honest about it. If the coverage came with appropriate epistemic humility about what one open practice can and cannot tell us. Instead, what's been happening is the opposite. Confident declarations built on fractional evidence, followed by quiet retreats when the next fraction contradicts them. Munkin actually acknowledged this dynamic directly in that same post-practice session, and I thought it was one of the more candid moments in the entire exchange. He confirmed that on Tuesday, the day the media was not present, Watson had the majority of first-team reps. And then on the open day, with cameras watching, Shedeur had them. That alternating structure is not accidental. The coaching staff knows exactly which day the media is attending. They are actively managing the public perception of this competition with the same intentionality they're bringing to actually running it. And I genuinely respect that. It's smart organizational management. It keeps both players mentally healthy in the competition, prevents the media from gaining enough consecutive data points to build real momentum on any single narrative, and it means that every confident conclusion being drawn from one open practice is being constructed on a fraction of what's actually happening inside that facility. The reporters treating that fraction as the full story are not serving their audiences well. That needs to be said plainly. Now let me talk about the media response to this specific practice, because it sorted itself into 3 distinct groups, and understanding those groups tells you something important about how Shedeur Sanders has been covered in Cleveland since the moment he arrived. The first group gave him his credit. They looked at the rep structure honestly. They called the Isaiah Bond throw what it actually was, a legitimate NFL-level anticipation throw executed under real competitive pressure. They processed Munkin's post-practice language for what it was actually pointing toward, and they reported what they saw without filtering it through a predetermined conclusion. That group did the job right. The second group went quiet, conspicuously, noticeably quiet, and that silence, following weeks of loudly building a Watson is ahead framework, is its own kind of information. When a story shifts and the people most invested in the previous narrative suddenly have nothing to say, what that absence tells you is something real about the confidence they actually had in the original reporting. But the third group is the one that genuinely bothers me. It's the most insidious form of coverage to argue against because it sounds reasonable on the surface. These are the voices who technically conceded that Shedeur had the better day, then spent the bulk of their analysis keeping the skepticism alive and breathing. The argument goes roughly like this. Sure, he looked good today, but the defense wasn't at full strength. Some of those completions came against players who might not make this roster. Myles Garrett wasn't rushing the passer on that deep ball. Denzel Ward wasn't in coverage on those downfield throws. He hasn't faced live competition in pads yet, and I want to be genuinely fair here. In isolation, some of those contextual factors are real and worth noting. But here is exactly where the intellectual honesty collapses. Every single one of those contextual factors was equally present on every day Watson had his strong sessions. The sessions that generated the Watson is leading headlines. The sessions that built the Watson has the inside track narrative. The starting defense wasn't fully deployed on those days either. The same caveats were sitting right there, available, accessible, ready to be deployed with equal energy. They just weren't. That asymmetry, rigorous scrutiny when Shedeur performs, charitable framing when Watson performs, that is not neutral coverage of an open competition. That is coverage that has already reached a conclusion and is working backward to justify it. And the people who follow this closely enough deserve to have that said without softening. The trajectory of Mary Kay Cabot's reporting on this competition illustrates the pattern as clearly as anything else has. Not long ago, she filed a report framed as insider intelligence indicating Watson had taken a meaningful lead and held what she characterized as the inside track on winning the starting job. That story circulated through the Cleveland media ecosystem quickly. It shaped how a significant portion of the fan base understood the competition for the better part of a week. And then, following one dominant Shedeur practice and one carefully constructed Munkin statement, she actively walked that characterization back. The situation was now more open than her original framing had implied. And the question that raises is unavoidable. What was the original report actually built on? If a single practice day and a single measured comment from the head coach are enough to meaningfully shift the assessment, what was the evidentiary foundation underneath the initial claim? I raise that question not to single her out, but because it's the question that clarifies why the coverage of this entire competition has been so persistently uneven. Now I want to spend some real time on Jeudy because what's developing between him and Shedeur is a separate layer of this story that deserves honest attention, and I don't think it's getting it. Coming from a receiver background myself, when I watch what's unfolding between those two in practice, I'm not watching an isolated drops problem or a concentration issue. I'm watching a trust account being actively drawn down. And I know exactly what that process looks and feels like from the other side of the ball, because I've lived it. The foundation of every functional quarterback-receiver relationship is not friendship. It's not the romanticized chemistry concept that shows up in training camp feature stories. It is reliability. Consistent, repetitive, unconditional reliability. A quarterback releases the football into a pressured, shrinking window because he trusts, at a level deeper than conscious thought, that you will be precisely where your route demands you to be, hands ready, every single time. That trust is constructed through hundreds of repetitions, through consistent footwork, consistent hand positioning, ball after ball after ball hitting palms and sticking. And it is damaged through drops, faster than most people realize, sometimes permanently. Every catchable ball that reaches your hands and falls to the ground is a withdrawal from an account with a genuinely limited balance. Enough withdrawals, and the quarterback starts looking elsewhere, not because he wants to. Not out of spite or personal conflict, out of competitive survival. His evaluation depends on completions, and on some level, he always knows it. What makes the Jeudy situation feel weightier than a standard drops conversation is the visible absence of that connective warmth during practice. The easy back and forth that develops naturally between players genuinely building something together. The post-play acknowledgement, the quick word after a rep, the body language of two people locked onto a shared task. When that's noticeably missing, when the space between them carries a kind of emptiness that feels deliberate rather than incidental, it is communicating something real about where the working relationship actually stands. Steve Smith has said for years that Jeudy doesn't consistently bring the mentality of a true number one receiver. And Smith has watched enough elite football to make that distinction with genuine authority. Last season, Jeudy had some of the best statistical work of his career. But when your own broadcast analysts are openly debating whether that output represented a genuine capability elevation or a context-driven performance within a specific offensive system that manufactured his opportunities, that is the exact opposite of the reliability bedrock a number one receiver is supposed to provide. The position Shedeur is navigating right now is genuinely difficult in a way that isn't being acknowledged clearly enough. He is being asked to build real competitive trust with a receiver who keeps making trust difficult to build while simultaneously competing in an evaluation being tracked and publicly reported in real time with organizational consequences attached. Every incompletion registers in the ledger, regardless of where the fault actually lives. Every dropped ball becomes a miss in the competition narrative, even when the ball was perfectly placed. That is not a clean evaluation environment. I'm not suggesting it's deliberately constructed to disadvantage him. I'm saying it is the reality he is operating inside, and the ancient contract between a quarterback and his receiver. You run your route with conviction. I'll put the ball exactly where it needs to be. You make the catch. When that contract gets broken repeatedly from the receiver side, the quarterback absorbs the statistical consequence. In a competition this visible, that matters an enormous amount. So here is what I want you to actually take from everything that happened at that practice, stripped of all the narrative backtracking and the asymmetric framing and the media management theater surrounding it. The core of this story is actually simple. When Shedeur Sanders is given a legitimate stage to compete on, he produces. When he gets first-team reps in real competitive periods, he performs at exactly the level those reps demand. When the defense has genuine stakes in the outcome, and the pressure is authentic, and there is nowhere to hide, he responds with throws, like the one to Isaiah Bond. Anticipatory, decisive, placed precisely on the outside shoulder before the receiver has declared his break, before the window has fully opened, based entirely on pre-snap diagnosis and mid-drop confirmation and the kind of conviction that you simply cannot manufacture. That is not a fortunate outcome. That is a quarterback who has already done the work before the ball leaves his hand. The coaching staff sees it. They are in that building 3 days a week, not one. They see the full arc across sessions, the consistency across competitive periods the media never attends. They see the complete picture, and the signal embedded in the structure of that practice. First-team reps from the opening period through the closing drill. The cleanest individual throw of the day delivered in the highest pressure situation of the session. A head coach choosing language at the podium precise enough to dismantle a week's worth of front-runner narrative in a single unhurried sentence. That was not incidental. That was deliberate organizational communication, and the people inside that building understand exactly what it means. The formal announcement hasn't come. Pads aren't on yet. The preseason reps that tend to settle these conversations in a definitive way are still weeks away. All of that is true, but the direction this competition is moving, when you look at it without an agenda, when you genuinely account for what the rep structure communicated and what Monken's deliberately chosen words were pointing toward, is not actually ambiguous. Not to anyone watching it clearly and honestly. When the formal decision eventually arrives, nobody inside that building is going to be surprised by it. The only people caught off guard will be the ones who spent this stretch building Watson-leading narratives off incomplete data and uneven framing. For everyone else who has been paying real attention, the picture has been forming for a while now. That practice just made it significantly harder to pretend you can't see it.